before 75,000 men could storm the beaches of Inchon, before the guns opened, before the Marines climbed the sea walls, one lonely lighthouse had to come alive in the dark, or Korea would fall. The men sent to make that happen did not arrive in a battleship. They came through hostile water in small craft, moving toward islands where one careless word could bring North Korean soldiers down on them before the invasion fleet ever appeared. U.S. Navy Lieutenant Eugene F. Clark was assigned to enter the approaches to Incheon ahead of the Armada. His job was to gather the facts that maps, aerial photographs, and staff briefings could not guarantee. He needed to know whether the channels were mined, whether the tide tables could be trusted, where North Korean guns were positioned, and whether the lighthouse on Palmi-do still worked. Clark was not working alone. His Korean partners were essential to his mission's survival. Yoon-jung, a former Republic of Korea Navy lieutenant, and K. In-ju, a former Republic of Korea Army colonel, helped give the operation access that Clark could not create by himself. The Korean War was already in crisis. North Korean forces had crossed the 38th parallel on June 25, 1950, captured Seoul within days, and driven South Korean and United Nations troops into the southeast corner of the peninsula. Around Busan, exhausted defenders held a perimeter that could not shrink much more. If that line collapsed, the war might become an evacuation. MacArthur wanted to strike far beyond the North Korean front. The target was Incheon, the port west of Seoul. A landing there could threaten enemy supply lines, reopen the road to the capital, and force the North Korean army at Busan to turn around before it could finish the job in the south. That landing was Operation Chromite. Clark's mission was one of the hidden moves that had to happen before Chromite could begin. On September 1, 1950, Clark's team linked with Republic of Korea Navy Commander Lee Sung-ho aboard PC-703 southwest of Tokchok-do. They learned that Yonghung-do had only a small North Korean presence, while a larger enemy force held nearby Daebu-do. Commander Lee assigned Lieutenant Junior Grade Pike and 10 sailors to help Clark's group seize Yonghung-do. The island was taken quickly. That seizure changed everything. Clark now had a base near Incheon's approaches. From Yonghung-do, the team could watch movement, launch small craft, question prisoners, send reports, and reach deeper into the harbor system. Local support grew. More than 1,000 inland residents helped in various ways. 24 communist sympathizers were detained. 114 young men were organized into an island defense guard. Commander Lee continued support under orders from Admiral Sun Won-yil. Clark requisitioned 5 junks and 4 sampans for further operations. Now Clark had boats, allies, and a base. The harbor's secrets still had to be taken one by one. Incheon was strategically perfect because it sat near Seoul. That was why MacArthur wanted it. A successful landing could cut into the North Korean rear, threaten communications and supply lines, and force the enemy army attacking the Busan perimeter to fight for its own survival. That same port was geographically brutal. Incheon was reached through restricted approaches, including the Flying Fish Channel and the East Channel. Currents could be strong. The water was shallow. At low tide, the harbor opened into broad mudflats. Landing craft could strand far from the shore. At high tide, boats could reach the sea walls, then lose that advantage as the water fell away. The tidal range was the central danger. Planning accounts describe average tides around 29 feet and maximum observed ranges near 36 feet, among the most severe tidal conditions faced by a modern amphibious landing. That shaped every part of the operation Clark was supporting. Ships had to enter the approaches in sequence. Fire support had to suppress Palmi-do, the fortified island guarding the harbor. A mine, a grounded vessel, a disabled navigation aid, or an unreported gun battery could throw the schedule into chaos. The seawalls created another problem. At Red Beach, Marines would have to climb from landing craft onto hard urban edges. Scaling ladders were part of the plan because the waterfront itself was an obstacle. Tanks, bulldozers, ammunition, and vehicles would matter only if they landed at the right hour and reached exits before the harbor drained away. Senior officers understood the danger. Navy and Marine planners objected to the huge tides, mudflats, seawalls, and narrow approaches. General Omar Bradley reportedly called Inchon, quote, the worst possible place ever selected for an amphibious landing. MacArthur turned the same danger into his argument. Incheon looked so unsuitable that he believed North Korean commanders would not expect a major landing there. At a planning confrontation in Tokyo, he pressed the point and declared, quote, we shall land at Incheon, and I shall crush them. MacArthur could approve the operation. Vice Admiral Arthur D. Struble could command the fleet. Marines could rehearse for the sea walls. None of that revealed what waited at the harbor's mouth. Clark's team had to find out. The work was concrete. They checked navigational lights, especially those on Palmi-do and Palmido. Clark also made his own reconnaissance of Palmido, the island that dominated the harbor entrance. The team's intelligence network reached inland. Clark made contact with resistance elements near Manhaksan and Soresan, close to Yongdongpo. Those contacts helped produce target information on gun emplacements and troop strengths around Incheon, Kimpo, and Seoul. The same mission confirmed the accuracy of Japanese tide tables, a result that sounds small until the landing schedule is understood. Every useful answer made the invasion more possible. Every patrol also made the secret harder to hide. Clark's Hidden Island Command now had to survive long enough for its intelligence to matter. The calendar was tightening. By early September, the UN command was gathering ships, Marines, soldiers, supplies, and landing craft for an operation whose secrecy was already under strain. Reports later described fears that the buildup had become, quote, Operation Common Knowledge. A North Korean-Japanese spy ring was arrested with a copy of the Chromite Plan, creating uncertainty over whether the enemy had already been warned. That made Clark's position more dangerous. If North Korean commanders discovered the island network and understood what it meant, they might reinforce Incheon, block the channels, damage the lighthouse, or hunt the Korean civilians and agents helping the mission. Yonghong-do gave Clark proximity to the approaches. Palmi-do gave him a key observation point, and eventually the lighthouse itself. Commander Lee and Clark also set up mine-searching activity, while Lee investigated guns on Palmi-do and Palmido. Each report flowed into the larger invasion plan, forming offshore. Clark's group used local boats to move through the coastal traffic. They questioned fishermen. They mapped enemy patrols and schedules, then compared them against tide tables, charts, and what their own eyes could confirm. The intelligence helped with the gunfire plan. If ships and aircraft were going to suppress Palmi-do and Incheon, they needed exact targets. A bunker hidden on a slope, a battery near a channel, or troops positioned near Kampo could shape the first hours after the landing. The scale of that larger plan was immense. Operation Chromite would involve roughly 75,000 troops and about 260 vessels. The landing force included the 1st Marine Division, elements of the U.S. Army's 7th Infantry Division, Republic of Korea troops, and a coalition naval force that included United States, South Korean, British, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, French, and Dutch participation. Clark's immediate world was on a much smaller scale. His world was junks, sampans, island guards, radio messages, and the constant risk that a local informer or enemy patrol could collapse the mission overnight. The mission had begun to leave marks. More boats were moving. More villagers knew something was happening on that tiny island. More enemy patrols were being watched, intercepted, or avoided. North Korean troops on nearby Palmi-do had reason to suspect that Yonghongdo had become hostile ground. The risk was not only to Clark and his men, but also an existential threat to the entire island community. Local men had joined the defense guard. Families had helped the reconnaissance team. Communist sympathizers had been detained. If the enemy returned before the fleet arrived, the islanders would be exposed. Clark's team kept working because the schedule allowed no safe pause. The tide windows for September 15th were approaching. The bombardment phase would soon begin. The fleet still needed Palmi-do's light to guide the landings, and Clark's group still had to be alive to provide it. Then the North Koreans came for Yonghongdo, and the reconnaissance mission turned into a fight for the islands. The enemy attack came before Clark's work was finished. It came from Palmi-do. North Korean forces there had been infiltrating men toward Yonghongdo, and accounts describe an attack force of 6 junks carrying roughly 80 to 90 men. He led 5 junks against the enemy boats. His group captured 2 and sank 4, stopping the immediate attempt to retake the island. He also secured destroyer fire against Palmi-do, where the threat was forming. The mission had crossed into open combat. Yonghongdo was no longer a discrete source of information. If North Korean forces returned in strength before the fleet arrived, the islanders would be treated as traitors. By September 14th, Clark believed another assault on Yonghongdo was imminent. With the Inchon landing less than a day away, he prepared to evacuate about 300 islanders using 17 captured junks. The mission that had asked locals for help now had to decide how many of them it could protect. Not all of them could be saved. A day after the much-awaited invasion, a Marine battalion sent to Palmi-do and Yonghongdo would find the Communist forces had taken the lives of more than 50 people who had helped Clark but remained behind. The fight had bought enough time. Clark and his Korean partners shifted toward Palmi-do, where the mission's final task waited in the lighthouse. Offshore, Operation Chromite was already at sea. Vice Admiral Arthur D. Struble commanded the landing and supporting naval forces. The fleet included fast carrier aviation, cruisers, destroyers, amphibious ships, Royal Navy and Commonwealth participation, South Korean vessels, and other Allied ships. The UN command also tried to mislead the North Korean attention. Deception efforts pointed toward other possible landing sites, including Kunsan. Patrol aircraft, surface ships, and submarines watched for North Korean, Soviet, or Chinese reactions in surrounding waters. The goal was to keep the enemy uncertain until the tide schedule made surprise irreversible. The battle had begun before D-Day. Days before the landing, 43 United States warplanes hit Palmi-do with 93 napalm canisters to burn out its eastern slope before troops arrived. On September 13th, naval gunfire and air bombardment began in earnest. Cruisers and destroyers fired on Palmi-do and Incheon's defenses. Canadian destroyers also participated in the invasion task force. Enemy guns answered. The invasion was now moving on 2 tracks, the giant fleet closing from the sea, and Clark's surviving team closing on Palmi-do. The gunfire had kept the mission alive. The next move would reveal it to every ship in the approach. By the night of September 14th, the fleet was close enough to desperately need the lighthouse, and Clark was close enough to expose himself by lighting it. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the lighting guide that would most likely turn into Clark's team's undoing. The ships had to pass through Inchon's approaches during the right tide. The first Marines would strike Palmi-do in the morning. Later landings would come with the afternoon tide against the Inchon waterfront. If the fleet lost its place in darkness, the plan could unravel before it reached the beaches. Palmido's light now had a practical job. It would give the force a fixed navigational reference in the water that Clark had been studying for days. The lighthouse stood near the approaches to Incheon, positioned where ships could orient themselves before entering the channel system. A lighthouse is meant to be seen. Lighting it too early could warn the enemy that something important was happening in the approaches. Lighting it too late could leave the lead ships without the reference they expected. Keeping it dark would waste one of the mission's most important gains. A lighthouse also created discipline across many ships. That was exactly the kind of certainty Clark had been sent to produce. The invasion schedule left little slack. Palmi-do had to be hit first because its guns and position dominated the harbor. Red and blue beaches would follow later against the city's seawalls. The fleet had to move through Flying Fish Channel in an order that allowed gunfire support, landing craft, tanks, Marines, and follow-on troops to arrive without blocking one another. Clark's team had spent 2 weeks shrinking uncertainly. The mission had paid for every hour it gained. There was no private way to finish the assignment. A report could be coded. A prisoner could be hidden. A boat could move as if it were fishing. Lighting a lighthouse had no way of being subtle. Once Palmi-do lit, the team's secret role in the harbor would become visible. In the same moment, the fleet received what it needed. At 12:50 a.m. on September 15th, 1950, Clark and his South Korean team lit the Palmi-do lighthouse. The beam gave the lead ships the fixed reference they expected as they moved toward Flying Fish Channel. For the men on Palmi-do, concealment ended. For the ships offshore, the harbor became manageable. For the invasion force, the preparation phase had passed into execution. By morning, Marines were climbing into Incheon's harbor defenses. The approach still offered little comfort. The channels were restricted. The mudflats waited beneath the tide. The harbor defenses had been bombarded. But Palmi-do still had to be taken, and the city beyond it still had to be entered by force. The lighthouse gave the fleet what Clark's mission had promised: direction. Later, on September 15th, the first major assault hit Palmi-do. At about 6:30 a.m., the lead elements of 10th Corps landed on Green Beach on the island's northern side. The force included 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, under Lieutenant Colonel Robert Taplett, and 9 M26 Pershing tanks from the Marine 1st Tank Battalion. 1 tank carried a flamethrower. 2 had bulldozer blades. By noon, Palmi-do was secured. Reported UN casualties for that objective were only 14, while North Korean losses included more than 200 fallen and 136 captured, mainly from the 918th Artillery Regiment and the 226th Independent Marine Regiment. The afternoon brought the Marine landings against Incheon itself. Marines at Red Beach used scaling ladders to get over the sea wall. At Blue Beach, landing craft moved under the pressure of the tide and enemy fire. Tank landing ships and other landing craft carried troops, tanks, ammunition, vehicles, and supplies into a harbor that could become mud beneath them within hours. One famous Marine Corps photograph from Red Beach shows First Lieutenant Baldomero Lopez leading his platoon over the northern seawall with wooden scaling ladders visible behind him. Lopez fell within minutes while assaulting a North Korean bunker. Palmi-do helped the fleet reach the harbor. Lopez's fall shows what still had to be won ashore. The beachhead then became a logistics race. Seabees and underwater demolition teams helped build pontoon facilities and clear debris so the port could keep receiving men and material. By September 22nd, accounts of the operation list 6,629 vehicles, 53,882 troops, and more than 25,000 tons of supplies brought ashore. The landing had to become a supply artery fast enough to support the drive towards Seoul. The larger reversal followed quickly. Kimpo Airfield was taken on September 17th and became available to support operations 2 days later. Supplies and troops poured ashore. The Busan defenders began their offensive on September 16th. Seoul was returned to the South Korean government on September 29th after hard fighting. On September 27th, United States Army units moving south from the Seoul area met forces coming north from Busan, confirming the strategic collapse MacArthur had sought. MacArthur praised the assault with a line that became part of Inchon's memory, quote, "The Navy and Marines have never shone more brightly than this morning." The line fit the morning. The Navy had carried the force through the approaches. The Marines had taken Palmi-do and forced their way into Incheon. The landing reversed the pressure on Busan and reopened the road to Seoul. Clark, Yeon, K, Korean agents, Republic of Korea sailors, island defenders, and civilians made the harbor legible before the fleet arrived. They found channels, checked lights, confirmed tides, located guns, fought to hold the islands, and evacuated some of the people who had helped them. They could not save everyone, but they made sure the sacrifices of the Koreans that could not be saved made a difference toward the final war effort. They lit Palmi-do. A huge invasion entered Incheon, because a small team made the darkness usable.